Well, thank you very much for your for your introduction, Vincent, and also thank you very much for your participation and coming to listen to our research and what we have done in the past years. So here today I'm going to present, give an overview of my PhD research and also some of the main results that I have so far, and also what do I have left, a bit of overview what I'm doing now actually. So, wait. Okay, so I included this picture just to provide a bit of context about my PhD research. So here in these pictures you can see that we as citizens, we interact with the government on daily basis, sometimes on weekly basis, monthly basis, on different occasions through different means. So in all of these interactions, there is something going on here, and there is this interaction that citizens are having with their government. And this point of this interaction in public administration research has been considered very important. And the idea is that a part of, let's say, citizen perceptions, attitudes, or how they view their government is actually, this is where it's built, in their daily interactions that they have with the government and their experience that they have from this interaction. And this point of interaction has been studied quite thoroughly in public administration research. So we know quite a lot about it and what is going on there. So in my PhD research, I start with these two books, which are, I would say, classic books of public encounter study. The first one is Public Encounter by Gotzel, where the authors are putting together a volume where they actually start conceptualizing what is actually going on within this interaction. So what happens during this communication and interaction, and also what are its, let's say, bigger implications, or what is its bigger impact. And then on the second hand, there is also the street level bureaucracy, which is a classic theory of public administration. And this is also focusing on this point, but then is also looking at its implications for policy making. So as I mentioned, there's a lot that we know about this point where citizens are meeting their government and the interaction is happening face to face. However, with let's say with the emergence of technology and when it became a bit more trendy to use different type of ICTs in public service delivery, also some lines of research started focusing more on what is happening when citizens are not meeting frontline workers, for example, but they are accessing digital public services. And in this context, so in my research, I continue this line of reasoning, but then I focus on a specific, let's say, emerging technology in public service delivery, that is the chatbots, because these technologies, in my view, are pretty interesting to look from the perspective of the public encounters, because they also, let's say, automate the communication that is taking place there. And so in my study, I don't necessarily focus on, let's say, what are the advantages or disadvantages of chatbots for public service delivery, but it's more, the focus is more on what, let's say, if and when governments decide to use these technologies, what does this mean for our understanding of public encounters? What sort of phenomena can we see and explain from what is going on? And also what is the perception, or what is the sentiment on the citizen side? So how do they see these technologies, and what factors, let's say, could explain that? So then I conduct 3 studies as part of my research. So here you can see the first one. In the first study, what I do, so the first study is, I mean, it's co-authored. So what do we do actually is basically, we start the study by going first into the classic theory of public encounters and see what lines of research have been investigated there, and what is something interesting that could be brought to the study of chatbots in government. Then once we do so we identify, let's say, 3 key aspects of public encounters that we believe are important but also interrelated and require further investigation. That is the discretion, emotions and emotional responses, and as well as accountability. So once we do so, we also go back, take a step back, and basically go and observe cases of chatbots and studies about case studies of chatbots in public service delivery, and basically reflect based on that and see, okay, what can we learn from there? What is something that, let's say, requires further investigation, but also what sort of phenomena can we see there that we conceptualize and theorize? So we start first with the discretion. So a general idea in research is that the more technology you have on the frontline work, basically there's less discretion, or less decisions are made by humans. And we sort of go, in one way, go against this, but on the other hand, also expand this. So basically, our idea, what we theorize in this study is that actually the discretion is not disappearing from human frontline workers, but what we see is that it's going on the back office. So it's shifting towards the back office, and here you have new sort of actors that are applying this discretion. And we conceptualize also these actors into information system professionals, domain experts, and what in literature are often called as prompt engineers, but here we call them bot whisperers. So these are people who are working on the back office in developing and implementing these technologies. Then on the second place, we have emotions and emotional responses. So emotional, let's say, ideas, topics like emotional intelligence, empathy, verbal, non-verbal cues, and emotional labor have been considered very important in public administration research, and there's actually a lot of empirical evidence that they have an impact on the outcomes of these interactions between citizens and government. However, when we went back to chatbots, what we see is that actually in the first place there is no discussion, let's say, about the emotional intelligence of frontline workers and how this affects decision making. There is no discussion about that, but the discussion is rather on how to design and implement these technologies in order that they can mimic human-like, let's say, social and emotional capabilities. And what we see, but then on the other hand, when we look at the cases, what we see is that basically citizens, they still have emotional responses. So when they are interacting with a chatbot, they can get angry, frustrated, disappointed, and in some cases start over-relying on these technologies. But then at the same time, there's no mechanisms to sort of manage or handle this in the same way that frontline workers do. And this is, I would say, quite meaningful for public service delivery. And the last one is accountability, which is a classic theme of public administration. So accountability, when we look in the literature, we see that when it comes to frontline workers, their work is pretty much very well and strictly regulated with different accountability mechanisms. But then when we look into this shift in discretion and what is happening in the back office where these technologies are developed and implemented, we see that actually it's pretty blurry, the picture that we have now. At least from an academic standpoint, we don't really know what accountability mechanisms are in place there, and how do they look like. And this is why for all of these topics, we also, apart from only theorizing and conceptualizing them, we also provide a research direction. So we create a research agenda on how future research could steer the discussion. Then we take a step back in the second study. So this is where we focus a bit more on the citizen perspective. So what is their sentiment actually towards these technologies, which now you actually have them, you can see quite often in policy documents and strategies at the national level. And what we do in this study, so we build a theoretical model in order to explain citizen intentions to use these technologies. And to do that, we conducted a survey vignette experiment in Estonia. So first we built vignettes, which are scenarios, let's say, short descriptive stories about scenarios that represent some real-life events or situations. And then we manipulated these scenarios in order to see citizen reactions. So if citizen reactions, and then each of the citizens, for each experiment, they had to read one story and then respond to the survey question so that we could capture what are their perceptions, attitudes, or let's say feelings about the scenario there. So in each scenario, we manipulated two variables. That is the explainability of the decisions made by chatbots. And explainability is a very, let's say, a very interesting topic because it's quite big in studies about AI in government in order to address the issue of lack of transparency when it comes to these technologies. And also the second variable we manipulated is the amount of information requested for you to interact with these chatbots. And then we build all the scenarios we built based on the Estonian case or based on the bureaucrat program. So we started with their promotional materials. And then since we had to manipulate the stories, we also added a bit, but then we also went back and validated, so carried out some interviews with people who are involved with this program in order to also get their, how to say, validation. And then in the end, we had a sample of 1,058 Estonian responses from Estonian citizens. And then these are the results. So basically, in this study, we were trying to find out whether citizens intend to use these technologies or not. So what we found out is that the first variable that we had, or let's say one of the strongest explanatory variables that we had, is perceived usefulness. So it turned out that especially when it comes to information provision chatbots, citizens, a big part of the decision is, let's say, made based on the utility of these technologies. The second one is trust in technology. So trust in technology can turn out to be a very strong explanatory factor as well. But on the other hand, not really trust in government. So we also expected trust in government to have a, let's say, to correlate with the intended use, but it didn't in our case. And then, to our surprise, explainability, so whether the chatbot is explaining the decisions, especially the negative ones, it didn't necessarily impact citizen intentions to use it, which I would say it's an interesting, very interesting finding, because it goes against the discussion that we are having in academia and in policy-making cycles, that explainability is an important, let's say, solution to the issue of opacity of AI, or the idea of black box AI. And lastly, we also had privacy concerns. So privacy concerns, it only had a negative effect on intended use on service provision chatbots. So basically where there was a bit of transaction. So let's say the interaction became a bit more complex, but not necessarily on the intended use. And lastly, we also manipulated the amount of information the citizen had to provide, which didn't necessarily matter about their intended use. So as long as they had general privacy concern for service provision chatbots, but not necessarily about the amount of information that they share. And then what I'm working, so these are studies that have been carried out and submitted and now are under review. So now I'm working on the third and the last article of my PhD. So here in my last article of my PhD, based on the findings from the first one, so here I want to go back and zoom into these back office operations. So what is happening when discretion is shifting from frontline workers to back office, let's say, government workers. And the research question that I have at the moment is, how do these, let's say, new roles in government, or these people working in these specific roles, apply their discretion as a mechanism to cope with uncertainty during the development and implementation? And what do I mean by uncertainty here is that during the development and implementation of public sector innovation, usually these things are being done for the first time. So there's a lot of uncertainty on what decision to make and how let's say these decisions will be translated into artifacts. So it's pretty unclear, and it's at the beginning usually it's also vague. So you don't necessarily know what is the right way to do things yet. So this is why I'm doing this research, and the idea is that here I'm doing abductive research. So I'm going between theory and data collection. So I will have several rounds of data collection. So first I will do a set of interviews, go back to theory, see, okay, with this case study, what type of research question, review my research question. So basically, what can I address? What is something that could be done? Or what leads do I have based on the interview? And then continue, go back to data collection, and then do another round like that, so that in the end I can theorize, because the article is theory building, so I can theorize the patterns that I observe in the data that I collect. And then, so this is more or less a brief overview of my PhD research. So here, these are only some of the reflections of the findings and results that I have so far, and I already touched upon. So the first, I think one of the biggest findings of my PhD so far, or biggest, let's say, contribution, especially to the academic discussion, is the idea of shifting discretion. I think this is really important, first as a finding, but at the same time it becomes more important because it opens a lot of new research questions and a lot of avenues for further research. Once you have this perspective, then there's a lot of research that we propose, but also there's a lot of research with regards to accountability, with regards to discretion and how these are applied and what, etc. So a lot of research questions came up after we did this, let's say, theorization. Then the second one is that chatbots require a lot of ongoing invisible work. So as users, for example, when we're using these technologies, but I see the same also as other AI applications in government, you sometimes have this feeling of continuity in automation when you're using these technologies. But then when you zoom in into the back office operation as what is going on in the back office, you see that there are different roles that are emerging. A lot of people are actually tinkering with the code or training these models or maintaining these models in order to ensure this feeling that you get as a user. The third one is that at the moment, with the current chatbots that we see a lot of cases of strong user emotional reactions, as I mentioned, anger, frustration, disappointment. So a lot of feelings, a lot of emotional responses there, but they are not necessarily with the cases that we observe, we don't see necessary capabilities to handle these in the same way that frontline workers do. So this is something totally unaddressed at the moment. Then, to summarize, also I already presented what are the variables that explain intended use in Estonia in the study with a theoretical framework that we constructed and the method that we use. So it was quite surprising that trust in technology was a stronger predictor, especially as opposed to trust in government. But I think that also aligns with the research that has been conducted in the institute where I'm doing my research, but also from David and Mikkel. And then the second one is the perceived usefulness was a very strong predictor, which some sort of aligns with previous research, but not fully. And then privacy concerns, I also expected privacy concern to have a negative impact on both information and service provision chatbots, but it only had an impact on service provision. And then lastly, the explainability and the amount of shared information or requested information from chatbots doesn't necessarily have an impact. And so the amount of information, yeah, there are also other studies that have similar findings, but regarding the explainability, I think this is an interesting finding, and also an interesting contribution to the ongoing discussion, especially about the type of explainability, because it's a pretty broad topic, and there are different types of explanations that can be constructed and ways to do them. But at least in the one that we chose, I think we proved that this is in this, maybe our contribution in this the way could be that maybe other types of explainabilities have the expected impact. So thank you very much, and I would open the floor for discussions.
Thank you very much. Please stay for a while, yeah. Because I would like to offer the opportunity for members in the audience to raise questions, ask questions, raise concerns, provide solutions, whatever you want. Who may I give the floor for questions, reactions, whatever? And don't be shy. Yeah, Mikael.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've seen your research, but maybe you could explain a bit if you show once more the reflections. The very first point, which was...
Okay, now I think I can go with.
Just a second. Yeah, this shift in the direction from frontline workers to backstage settings. Two things. How do you actually study that empirically? Because I understand if you cite those studies, they mostly have done those through directly interviewing, looking at these frontline workers, what they're actually doing and what they think about how they provide the service to the client. Whereas backstage settings essentially means people who design systems somewhere in some sort of, even in a private company or a setting that is completely not public. And the second question related to that, does that actually mean that rules, how this particular service is being provided and the legal setting would have to change as well? Because technically, I mean, it's happening anyway. Empirically, we know this is happening because of transfer to these types of technologies in providing public services. But it also has obviously implications what rules are set, how this accountability works, these types of things, which are pretty, let's say, important things, given that people need to be able to challenge those decisions by essentially, not necessarily chatbots, but some sort of automized rules as well.
So I mean, I will start first with, so what do we mean by back office? So first, in our study, I mean, frontline, it means people who are working basically what in theory are described as street-level bureaucrats, but what or those government employees that people meet when they go to meet an office government official. And then we call back office basically what is going on behind. So what is going on, let's say, exactly behind. How did we observe? So I will start with the first one. How did we observe is that there are actually in-depth studies already about chatbots, and we saw the same patterns in this study, but it was not necessarily conceptualized. So the discussion that is going on at the moment is about, let's say, human discretion and digital discretion. So once you implement such technologies, well, the discretion is basically shifting from humans, it's shifting to the computer. But then what we did is basically with Vincent, I mean, we are reflecting and observing these cases closer and closer and closer and closer, and actually, this is how we did it. And then we started theorizing it, and then in the last study that I will have, this is going to be the focus. So now we are actually going to talk to these people that are working in the back office, so in developing and implementing these technologies, training these models, and then now this is where we actually, how to say, conceptualize it or theorize it a bit further, this finding, because this is going to be the whole focus of the paper. And what was the second question?
Well, I mean, it's technology forces the change or shift of the discretion, but I mean, delivering services has a very sort of, I mean, it's a rule-based thing. There are certain rules that you need to follow. There are laws. There are specific types of procedures. How are those then actually changed when that shifting happens?
I mean, we are also, how does that change? We don't know, because there is no, actually, I can only speculate now because there is no such study. But at the same time, this is something that we consider. And what we consider is that in the frontline work, in the frontline government work, the frontline workers, they have specific professions and they have specific training. So a big part of their job is actually to interpret the rules and regulations that you mentioned to address specific and urgent citizen needs, right? So based on the urgency, specificity, and based on, I don't know, particular vulnerabilities, particular needs, they interpret the rules in such a way. And laws, what we do in the first paper already is that we go back into this idea of open texture. So how rules and regulations are written that are ambiguous to cover as many cases as possible, but then at the same time, it's the frontline workers who have these specific trainings, and they are trained to interpret these rules and regulations. And what we don't necessarily know is what is happening actually in the back office. So how these rules and regulations are being translated into code so that they can provide specific response. And I think this is, how to say, in the overall thesis, this is also going to be an important findings or an important contribution to the discussion, because it's not really as straightforward. So translating laws into codes and regulations and then having a technology interpreting them, I don't think is that straightforward. So, and this also is a topic closely related to accountability as well, because then accountability is the other layer of how these laws and regulations were interpreted to kind of keep it to keep it intact. So again, these are topics that I don't know actually if I'm going to address as part of my last study fully, because I still have to see what comes out of interview and then follow those leads. But these are certainly topics that we discussed in the first article and give quite some attention also for future research, especially to this open texture and how laws and regulations are intentionally written in an ambiguous way so that they cover as many cases as possible, because you don't necessarily know when laws are written what do you expect from citizens, but then is the frontline workers. But then the moment you're interacting with a chatbot instead of a human at frontline work, then all of these are issues actually that remain totally unaddressed. And I think also this is what my PhD is also highlighting and putting special attention to.
Thank you very much. I think this conversation will be continued with reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 in the process of getting these articles accepted, which will happen in the very near future. So again, thank you very much.